I think there's this idea that a robot is someone who has transcended their body. And I look at it from the other point of view. I think of robots as being truly embodied in a way that humans might have a hard time thinking about, because a robot could theoretically change their arms into octopus arms, or be an octopus, as Cayenne, the robot in the book, is. They can alter their bodies. They can sense things that humans wish they could, or that humans have to work really hard to experience. And so there's a way in which I think it's kind of easy to identify with robots, because they are what we dream that we would be if we could have complete control over our bodies. And anyone who's done yoga or weightlifting has had that moment where they kind of feel like a robot, because you finally unlock the I finally benched 60 pounds. Okay, that's not a lot, but I did bench 60 pounds yesterday. I felt pretty awesome. And I was like, yes, upgrade. And I think that is, in a weird way, because robots aren't like us, we can identify with them.
What is up, everybody? You're listening to episode 166 of SFF Addicts. I'm your host, Adrian M. Gibson, and welcome to your weekly dive into the world of science fiction, fantasy, and writing craft. Joining me this week is my co-host, the true to my Han Solo, the Joker to my Commander Shepard, MJ Kuhn. How you doing, MJ?
Hi, I'm doing wonderfully. How are you, Adrian?
I'm doing fantastic. And if you want to support MJ and her kitties, you can go get her books, go get Among Thieves and Thick as Thieves if you want to fatten those little cats up.
And if you want to support Adrian, go grab Mushroom Blues, or, well, I mean, I don't think it's up for pre-order yet, but check out his Instagram and stuff, because he has a new project coming out that is Murder Most Fungal, which is going to be pretty dope. So
that'll be out hopefully, later this fall. So just keep an eye on that. And if you want to support the Queen of Our Days, Greta Kelly, you can go check out her book, The Queen of Days, but also The Frozen Queen and The Frozen Crown and the Seventh Queen, if you want to support Greta and her kids, because she's got two little younglings that need some food.
And two kitties. She's got all of it.
Exactly. As well, a quick note for listeners, you can support SFF Addicts on Patreon for a ton of cool extras like bonus episodes, author readings, and more. Also, don't forget to rate and review the podcast on your favorite podcast app, and subscribe to the FanFiAddict YouTube channel, where this and every other episode of the show is available in full video. And now, welcoming to SFF Addicts, the wonderful Annalee Newitz, journalist, podcaster, and author of Autonomous. I love this book so much. I know MJ does too. But also The Future of Another Timeline and so much more, including their latest release, Automatic Noodle. Welcome to the show, Annalee. How are you?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm great. And I already got to see MJ's cats. So I feel like, life is good.
You're already part of the family.
Yeah, you're part of the
family. Exactly. Our cats have met over this recording application. Yeah.
They're internet
That is a
besties
true bonding moment. Wonderful. Well, Annalee, just for anyone who isn't aware of you, your work, if you can tell the listeners a bit more about yourself.
Sure. I'm a science journalist who also writes science fiction. I also have a podcast called Our Opinions Are Correct, which I co-host with Charlie Jane Anders. And, I've had a pretty long career in writing and started out purely as a journalist, but now I'm doing both science nonfiction books and science fiction books. So I kind of divide my time between telling the truth about science and history and just making shit up.
I love it. Between really good telling stories, the truth about science and history and telling the truth about society through fiction, really.
Well, there's a little bit of of truth in the shit that you make up.
Right,
so.
Exactly. A lot of it.
Yeah, there's truth and then there's truth. And it's sometimes hard to tell the difference.
Yeah. Before we dig deeper into the episode, a quick word from our sponsor. Welcome to Transference, where death and sickness are but a distant memory. Nicholas Five Boroughs is a sicko, someone that takes on others' illnesses. In a city where diseases can be transferred, The rich buy longer lives without pain, and the poor get a short life of constant sickness. Brought back from the brink of death by his friend Brian Meadowhearth, or maybe the invisible hand of an outside actor, Nick finally gets the chance to try and change things, to finally stop the whole disease transfer network. Tensions escalate as Nick infiltrates a higher society he doesn't understand, and starts to fall for Dorothy Sungate, the very person he needs to manipulate to be successful. And between run-ins with a talking cat, genetically modified humans, and a robotic police force, the world around him just keeps getting stranger. Can Nicholas tear down the disease transfer architecture? And how much of his humanity is he willing to bargain along the way? A dystopian vision of healthcare and a market economy, Transference will appeal to fans of Red Rising, Blade Runner, and the BioShock franchise. Soon to be a complete duology with the release of Transcendence in the summer of 2025. Transference by Ian Patterson is available now in paperback and ebook. Get your copy today. And now, enjoy the rest of this episode of SFF Addicts.
Well, we also always like to start out by exploring the nerdy origins of our guests, because we're all just big nerds here. So I'm curious, what were some of those early influences? I kind of want to do both sides of it, because how did you get into really being interested in science and getting into science journalism? What made you want to do that? And then did you have any nerdy sci-fi books and shows that made you want to write the fiction piece?
I mean, both. I was, when I was a kid, I think like a lot of nerdy kids, I was obsessed with outer space and dinosaurs and Greek mythology. I feel like in my little school library, I knew exactly where the shelves for those things were and pretty much read every single book I could. When I was a kid, there was a magazine, maybe it's still around, called National Geographic World, which was a kids version of National Geographic. And a lot of it focused on space and dinosaurs, of course, because things that kids like. And
they know their market. It's pretty clear.
Yeah, and I remember because I'm old enough that black holes were first described when I was a little kid. And World Magazine did a big feature on black holes. And I was just like, oh, this is so cool. I just want to spend the rest of my life finding out more about this kind of thing. And my family bought a home computer relatively early on as well. Not so much the home computer, but we had a modem very early on. And so I was going online and doing group chat stuff in the 80s. And so I got really excited about the idea of what it's like to talk to other people using computers and share ideas. For me, computers were always both a social tool and something that was technological. And I think for someone who's Gen X, that was a little weird. I feel like that's more of a millennial experience. But for me, it was I was just a really early adopter. And so I got to hang out with a lot of nerds. And of course, the whole time I was reading science fiction, when I was growing up. And I read a lot of the classic type stuff, that was available to me. I was not in a big city. So my library had stuff like Robert Silverberg and Ray Bradbury and Marion Zimmer Bradley and Ursula Le Guin, the big classics of the time. And so I read a lot of that stuff. And then I kind of drifted away from both science and science fiction for a while. When I went to college, I majored in English. I got a PhD in English, which was, a thing that happened. Don't necessarily recommend it, but it did happen. And while I was in grad school, I kind of reignited my interest in computers because digital humanities was starting to be a thing. And I started designing websites to give people access to resources on the web. And, where can you find histories of the atomic bomb? And where can you learn about obscure fiction writers and things like that? And so that's kind of my origin story, is that I was always, even when I was doing pretty hardcore humanities stuff, I always wanted to bring technology into it. And by the time I left academia, I really wanted actually to get away from the humanities. And so I started writing about technology for my local free weekly newspaper, the San Francisco Bay Guardian, where I eventually became an editor. And I started covering the social impact of technology and managed to write for pretty much every magazine that has science or technology in the title. So like New Scientist, Popular Science, Popular Mechanics, and I did that for a very, very long time before I managed to write any fiction. And it was really because I had been running IO9, a blog where we covered sci-fi, that I got contacted by an editor at Tor who was like, "Do you have a novel?" And it turned out that I actually did. I had a trunk novel that needed severe disciplining. And so that's my long origin story, really. I mean, that kind of takes you almost up to the present. So it's always like a long, weird story. It's like a winding path. I don't think any writer really has like an easy, simple trajectory, but mine has been particularly strange. So basically, it's just all about tricking people into paying me to write things.
I love it. That's the pull quote.
That's the like, I should have started from there, really. And then, and here are specific examples of how I did that.
Yeah. I mean, everyone has their winding path, like I was like a music journalist and then a tattoo artist. And then I somehow ended up in podcasting and writing.
Well,
so,
perfect path though. Like it makes complete sense.
That's part about the show though, is like every person we talk to, every author we talk to has like a radically different journey.
Yeah.
To, the present.
Yeah. But I want to talk about IO9 a little bit more because that was actually, looking back, probably my first sort of introduction to the world of sort of like tech and fiction blogging, because IO9 did have quite like a breadth of stuff. There was tech and there was some sort of, intersection with current events and whatnot. But then there was also stuff about fiction and stories and what was going on in the world of publishing. And I can't remember the first time I read it, but it must have been when I was in university, like well over 12, 13 years ago.
Yeah, it's been a long time.
It's been a long time, yeah. But I want to hear your thoughts on how you and Charlie Jane kind of went into the founding of this blog and like your ideation process and kind of coming up with this place that could be a resource for writers. Unfortunately, our co-host Greta is not here, but she says it's an incredible resource and gives so many authors a space to have their books seen where they might otherwise not have. So she's just wanted to, toss out that shout out and the thank you. But where did this idea come from and how were you able to sort of like sustain it for so long and kind of dig deeper into that blogging space?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's kind of a distillation of what blogging was like at its height, when blogging was a thing that a lot of people could imagine doing for money. And it was a brief time. And I was working at Wired as a contributing writer. And I became friends with Gina Trapani, who was running Lifehacker, which was an incredibly awesome blog that's still around, which is just about optimizing your life, making things easier and being more productive using technology. And she was like, yeah, I work for this company called Gawker Media. They have a couple of other blogs, you should check it out. And somehow through that, I wound up getting contacted by Gawker because they were interested in starting some kind of futurism blog. And I had an interview with Nick Denton, who owned Gawker Media at the time. And the interview was an IM-terview. We talked on IM before he hired me to develop. Again, we didn't really have, he was just like, tell me what you would want to do for a futurism blog. And I said, here's the deal. I grew up reading Omni magazine. Omni magazine was this incredible, bizarre magazine in the 70s and 80s. Ellen Datlow was their fiction editor. And it combined cutting edge science coverage and technology coverage with incredible science fiction, just like great new authors, emerging authors, also, masters of the genre. And I was like, that's what I want to create, is something that covers science and science fiction and brings those worlds together as much as possible. And luckily, Nick was like, okay, give it a try. And I really don't know that whether they thought it was going to work out. At that time, Gawker Media was trying a lot of different blogs. They'd spun up a ton of stuff. We turned out to be the last blog they ever launched. And we, right out of the gate, had tremendously good traffic. We, had a big viral post on the very first day that we launched, which was actually a science post. And so the company was pretty pleased with that. And that was part of how we were able to continue going, was that we really had a lot of institutional support. So my very first hire was Charlie Jane Anders, who was my partner and who she and I had collaborated on a lot of stuff before. So we knew we could work together really well. And we hired a couple more people. And Charlie was really the lifeblood of the culture coverage. And I was doing the science and tech coverage. Of course, we overlapped all the time. You can't have a bright line there. And a lot of our writers did both things. Some did only entertainment, some did only science. And so we shared that responsibility, but it really was such an incredible collaboration. And the site lasted for years, which again, nobody expected, least of all us. We kept telling each other, yeah, in a year, this will be over. And then that turned into, in 2 years, this will be over. And then, it wound up lasting for about 7-8 years for me. And, the site is still going. It's just not owned by Gawker Media anymore. And one of the people we hired, James Whitbrook, is the editor-in-chief now. In fact, James started as a commenter, and we found him in the comments. And he was just such a great commenter. He would give these, when he was a college student, and he would just, he would give these amazing analysis, like he would come in and just like analyze a show in the comments, or analyze some new change in Star Wars or Marvel or something like that. And we're like, who is this guy? Turns out he's a little guy from England. Now he's a grown-up guy in England. So yeah, it was just, as you were saying when you were asking the question, it was a place where we really wanted to showcase the talents of so many people who are creators in science fiction. And a lot of sites cover movies and TV, but not a lot cover books and art. And we wanted to really foreground that stuff, because those are the people who are really at the cutting edge. A lot of times things happen in science fiction writing and fantasy writing, a decade before they happen in other media. And our sister site, Kotaku, covered video games. So we would sometimes kind of collaborate with them and cross-post with them and get their takes, because they also had really cutting edge, super smart video game criticism, and they would always cover indie games. And so that was a big part of the ethos, I think, for us and our sister sites, was you have to cover the indie stuff. You have to showcase that stuff right alongside the latest Marvel movie, because it's an ecosystem. It's not just the big stuff. And again, because I'm a science nerd, the science is so important too. And so we would get people coming in, to read about whatever, I'm trying to think of like what would have been a huge franchise. They came in to read about Tron 2. And, but then they would stick around to read about new developments in genetic engineering or new discoveries in one of Jupiter's moons. But we also got people doing vice versa. Like, people would always say to me, like, oh, you're suckering people in with the sci-fi and then they stay for the science. But lots of people came because they read our science coverage, and then they would say, oh, here's a book that sounds really interesting. And so it was great. We were sucking people in from both sides and polluting their minds. So
polluting their minds in a good way, like
cross pollution. Yeah, in a good way, like polluting them with I guess we should say, illuminating them.
Yeah, there you go. Don't make it a negative connotation. Yeah. Come on.
Yeah.
Because, like, honestly, Kotaku is where I found, just through that association of like Gawker Media, is how I found IO9. And like, I love video games, and I grew up like, I got into podcasts because of video games, and I got into a lot of like tech stuff as well because of video games. But that was just sort of like one step on the ladder. And
Yeah.
finding a place like IO9 and learning so much about like science and physics and tech in conjunction with like, these are these stories that I love, these are these stories I haven't found yet, and
Yeah.
just being able to introduce people to that is so amazing. And I think like it is kind of it's just like this snippet in time where blogging was in this beautiful moment. And I think now we're in kind of a weird space when it comes to blogging. There's like so many different avenues of gathering information. Like we'll talk about podcasting as well, but I wanted to get your take on like the current landscape of blogging, because it has shifted from the heyday of a place like IO9 or just, Gawker Media and in general and other blogs.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that was interesting about Gawker Media, and it wasn't the only company like this, was that there was this business model of having a network of blogs where you would draw traffic in with maybe high profile titles, and then you would also then cross post something from one of your smaller titles to these bigger blogs, and that would lift all the sites up, right? Because your big site would get all this great content, but then you would also drive people to these smaller sites. And it really was similar to models of, kind of old-fashioned publishing, where you might have a bunch of magazines and then you would advertise those magazines in each other. And so it would be kind of a virtuous cycle. And I do think that places like Gawker Media and some of the other blog networks kind of imagined that they would be the next Condé Nast, which of course owns a lot of really big magazines like Vogue and the New
Bon
Yorker and
Appetit
stuff like
as
that.
well.
Bon
One of my
Appetit,
faves.
yeah, exactly. Love Bon Appetit. And so I think, yeah, this was really kind of the aughts and the early teens when you saw a bunch of these blog networks starting. And, then the business model just did not withstand, I think, a lot of the transformations in the internet, but also political transformations too, because a lot of blogging relied on having mainstream media to kind of act as a foil for it. And as mainstream media started to collapse, partly because of us, there was less of a balance there. And so it became really chaotic. Nobody knew where to get ads from. Blogs, the model for blogs was free content that was ad supported, just like a free weekly. Of course, the free weeklies were dying too, partly thanks to us. And it just advertisers finally were just like, we don't want to be associated with these sites anymore. Either they would go to the big platforms like Facebook and Twitter at that time, or they would go back to a more traditional source. They would go back to a magazine, or they'd go back to television advertising. So I think what's happened now is, of course, a lot of us in the blogger diaspora have started new projects. A lot of the folks from Kotaku do a great site called Aftermath, which is focused on video games. People from Deadspin, which was the sports blog in our network, created Defector, which is incredibly successful. It's a worker-owned site. So a lot of folks are now experimenting with, why don't we become independent? Why don't we become worker-owned? And I think now the equivalent of blogging is really influencers. So you can have a newsletter where you get sponsorship, or you get enough crowdfunding or subscriptions to support it. Or you can have, people who are doing individual podcasts or things that are very focused on just sort of one personality generally. So you don't get that kind of group production like we had in blogging days. And I think we're about to hit kind of a rebundling moment where like a lot of these individual newsletters might start teaming up and creating networks. I mean, there already are some. I shouldn't say that doesn't happen, but I think that we're going to see a big correction where people realize that Substack is not a great place to depend on for money. And they might want to go out and find some friends to form a worker-owned enterprise instead.
Yeah, and I think you could probably see that with podcasting too. I know there are podcast networks for sure, but like
Mm-hmm.
the independent like community network type development is something that I can see more and more of, because like like we do the podcasting for the love of it. Don't make a lot of money doing this,
Yeah.
but there are some people who do make money doing it, but that kind of often falls into that what you're saying, like a bit of a cult of personality type thing.
Yeah, there's
as
a cult
well.
of personality, or there's always on every platform, there's a few people who are able to make a living. Like there's, 2 guys on Spotify and like 3 guys on Substack, and they're almost all guys. And either those people go off and make their own media deals, like Barry Weiss, who was the biggest moneymaker on Substack. She's now negotiating with CBS to run their news coverage, right? So she'll be back in corporate media. And I think a lot of other folks are going that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, digging into that kind of fracturing the blogger diaspora, as you put it, which is lovely.
Yeah.
You and Charlie also started a podcast together, which we mentioned a little earlier. I want to dig into it a little more, though. Our Opinions Are Correct, which is, by the way, the best name for a podcast ever. No offense to us, Adrian.
It's fine. It's fine.
It's so good.
I'm also going to show off the artwork because it's like, I love this show so much.
Yes. Oh my God. Yeah.
So good. Why did you two decide to start this podcast? And, is it connected at all to the kind of shrinking of the blogging community?
Charlie Jane and I really missed doing IO9 together. I mean, we didn't miss the headache of running an entire, organization and having to deal with payroll and stuff like that. But we did miss just getting to have conversations about science fiction and science and society and sharing them with people and creating a community around it. Because that was the thing that was always really awesome about IO9, is it was a community of people, and we made lots of friends through meeting commenters and meeting our writers and things like that. So we want to do something like that. And man, this was like 5 or 6 years ago now. We thought naively that it would be just like IO9. We would just find some network to join, and then poof, we'd have, 1 million listeners and no problem. Somebody would take care of all the production for us and we would just be babbling. And that's not really how it works. And, again, this is sort of the collapse of that network model. We did talk to a couple of podcast networks about joining them, and nothing ever really fit for us. There were ads we didn't want to run and compromises we didn't want to make. And so we just said, okay, we're just going to be indie. We're going to be basically the zine equivalent of a podcast. And we are purely supported by Patreon. So it's all just a subscriber model. And we now make enough money that first we were just breaking even. And then we made enough money to hire an actual producer and an engineer, which is really, really important to us because we suck at that stuff. We're just not great at editing. I listen a lot to Who Weekly, which is actually another blogger diaspora podcast. And they do all their own editing and production. They're like a hugely popular. Yeah. And I mean, good on you. And I'm always just like, wow, you guys are rad, but we don't do that. So now we still have a producer engineer, Naya Harmon, who just started about a year ago. And we're now making enough money that we can pay contributors, which is super awesome. That just started last year. We kind of finally made it to now we can bring people on who we like and have them do a segment and give them some money for it. So that's been really great. But honestly, we're making enough money that we can go out to dinner like once a month on our, proceeds from the podcast. So, it's just for the love. And it reminds me of, doing zines back in the 90s. It's just purely to talk to friends.
It's like punk media, but the modern edition of it. And
yeah, it's totally DIY.
Yeah. And the cool thing is, like, honestly, podcasting, is garnering like a larger market share in the information space. Like I learn so much through podcasts, and I tend
Same.
not to listen to audiobooks because that sort of like time in my life is more occupied by podcasts and nonfiction stuff. But I wanted to kind of bring in your nonfiction book, Stories Are
Mhm.
Weapons, which is really fantastic. But kind
Oh,
of as we
thanks.
talk about this, like this new media space and the distribution and dissemination of information, to kind of get your thoughts on the intersection of information and storytelling, like especially in the context of human psychology, which has been such a huge part of our lives, especially in this era of social media, in this era of new forms of information gathering and distribution and whatnot. So,
Yeah, I mean, one of the things about Stories Are Weapons is that it's a history of psychological war and culture war in the US. And one of the things I found while I was researching it, which I don't understand what past Annalee was thinking about that. Like past Annalee was like, sure, I wanted to spend 3 years researching the most depressing possible thing ever. That's going to be great. Um, but I think it's because I didn't realize how upsetting it would be, which is pretty naive. But, you know, mostly of course this is a book essentially about propaganda. How do you make good propaganda? How do you and when I say good I mean effective, and how do you engage in information war or culture war? What are the weapons? And that was kind of how I started, kind of almost from like a video game point of view. Like I need a list of all the weapons and I'm going to catalog them and then deploy them in a story. And so what I found is that all of the folks who were coming up with rules for how to engage in psychological warfare, most of them had a background in fiction writing, many or at least admired fiction writing. And there really is a strong connection between being able to tell a really great science fiction story, especially, and being able to, or a fantasy story, and being able to write effective propaganda or make effective propaganda. And there's this big, we have this idea that there's fiction and nonfiction, and those are two poles, those are two ends of a continuum. And propaganda is right in the middle. There's a big, wide middle where you have propaganda, you have advertising and marketing, you have public relations, you have all of these kind of persuasive arts that borrow from nonfiction. They always have to have a few little facts in there, but then they kind of wrap those facts in narrative, storytelling narrative that's emotional and persuasive and really slants the facts in a particular way. And so that's why a lot of Stories Are Weapons focuses on the career of Paul Linebarger, who wrote science fiction under the name Cordwainer Smith and was a pretty popular kind of cult sci-fi writer in the late 50s, early 60s. He died pretty young, so he didn't make it out of the 60s. But he also, in his day job, was working in psychological operations for the US Army during World War II. And afterward, he became a State Department military expert who helped the Army put together the first manual on how to do good psyops. It's called Psychological Warfare. And you can get copies of it now online for free. And he basically lays out those rules where he's like, yeah, tell a story, basically. He has this great line where he says, a Laurel and Hardy movie works better as American propaganda than, a movie, a documentary about square-jawed men doing farming. That's really the way to persuade people to want to surrender to America or work with America. The best way to do it is make funny, good pop culture and then slip some political messages in there. And so, yeah, America has always been a really great propaganda machine because we have such a robust entertainment industry. And that's why it's kind of funny now that we're seeing so much censorship of our media from our national government. It's going to prevent us from having that great propaganda machine. So our propaganda is actually getting shittier and shittier, and it's kind of, you can see it happening in real time. People are like, wow, the Trump administration is saying the quiet part out loud. And it's like, yeah, that's shitty propaganda. Like, you don't say the quiet, you have to secret your plans inside of something that kind of masks what you're doing, because otherwise people figure it out. So, yeah, it's interesting to see that the more propaganda you have, the lower quality it is.
Right. I mean, it's so interesting to compare now to like what we're living through now and all the access that we have available to us versus like, say, like Nazi Germany in the 1930s, where, you know, Joseph Goebbels and the Nazi Party were so good at exactly what you said, that like psychological manipulation through things like entertainment, like, you know, basically German films that were like building up this image and this foundation of what it means to be German, what it means to be part of like the master race and all this different kind of stuff. And now
and they were.
Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was gonna say, and they also were saying the quiet part out loud. I mean, that's why people love to compare Nazis to the current fascist political parties that we have now. But yes, they were doing the same thing that we see now, which is they were using film, they were using radio. They had fake news broadcast on fake radio stations. It was just like the internet, except radio. And so it was, it's an interesting, I mean, I feel like the 20th century and 21st century have really been about figuring out ways to persuade each other at scale and as quickly as possible. And, but also it's been a race to kind of fight against that too. You know, so people are coming up with ways to combat propaganda, to prevent AI scraping of their websites. And, you know, we're just, it's a culture war, and that's what happens.
Yeah. I mean, with every, you know, cultural wave comes, you know, those counterculture people.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the beautiful thing about humanity is like, you know, there's always going to be someone out there that's like, fuck you.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. It's just going to say no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, all right. Well, we are half an hour in, which is pretty normal for us. We're going to actually start talking about the book we brought you on to talk about.
I feel like you don't even have to say it anymore, MJ. But...
We always do that. So let's get into your new novella, Automatic Noodle. It so wonderfully blends robots and food. It's, oh gosh, well, just, can you give us a pitch for it before I butcher a pitch for it?
Luckily, I did not have to pitch this book formally before I wrote it. But what it is about is 4 robots who live in San Francisco after California has won a war of independence from the United States. It's pretty near future. It's in the 2060s. And robots have been granted a certain number of civil rights in this new nation of California, which is such a techno nation that they've decided to do this. But the rights are pretty ambiguous because robots can do certain things. They can choose where they want to work, sort of, but they can't vote. They can't own property. They can't reproduce. There are many, many, many restrictions on them. And so these 4 robots, they just want to survive. So they open this noodle restaurant using kind of a legal loophole. And it's kind of just following their adventures as they try to make it and not get crushed by robophobia and draconian laws about what robots are allowed to do.
Yeah, it was such a fun book, honestly. It's like with all the shit that's happening in the world right now, it's so nice to just read a book that it's like a little slice of life, even though it's a robot's life, a little slice of life that's like, man, this feels so comfortable. And it's like, I name dropped Bon Appetit earlier. Like, I'm a big foodie. So this book made me very happy in a lot of ways. But,
oh, good. Yeah.
It's also really cool because you said it in San Francisco, and it's, you know, a city that is so near and dear to you. So, you know, you mentioned how California split and gained independence from the United States. Can you kind of set up how you went about creating this, you know, post-war San Francisco, kind of establishing the world building and background of this book?
So part of my goal in writing this book was to focus on recovery and repair, partly because I had just written this book about psychological warfare and I needed comfort. And so I wanted it to be a story that acknowledged the horrors and hardships of war while also having those all be offstage in the background. And so we do get, of course, little glimpses of what the war was like from the robots' perspectives, because they all were in one way or another part of the war. And the story itself, though, it's 5 years after the war is over. The city is rebuilding. And so I wanted to think about what it would be like to rebuild San Francisco differently. I've lived in the city since 1999, and I've seen it go through a lot of transformations and a lot of economic boom and bust cycles. And right now, the city's in a really dark time in terms of its social programs, in terms of gentrification, and all kinds of other stuff that I'm not going to go into right now because it's a whole other topic. But the city needs a reboot. And I wanted to just kind of have that reboot have happened already. I really do not want San Francisco to be bombed into nothing by a war. I love the city so much. I can't tell you how upset I would be if these things actually happen, but they've already happened. So now we can focus on what do we do next? And I wanted it to be really low stakes in a sense, like not, some kind of all of California is at stake or all of the globe is at stake. I just wanted it to be the stakes that regular people deal with all the time, which is how am I going to get enough money to survive? How am I going to escape from shitty surveillance capitalism or like being review bombed online, which is one of the issues that they deal with. And probably every writer in the universe has also dealt with.
I think there have been some occurrences in our community.
Yeah.
various occurrences that people will be very, hit them in the feels about like review bombing and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. We've all it's so funny because also I talked to a lot of food writers when I was working on this book, and they all really recognized that. Like that really resonated. They're like, oh yes, so many people in the restaurant business, like this is their biggest fear. This is something they have to manage all the time. And and you can see it if you go on Grubhub or go on like Yelp or one of these places, you can see people who own the restaurants up in the comments being like, oh, I'm really sorry. Like, please don't be mean. Like it matters a lot.
This isn't what I signed up for when I opened a restaurant. Please.
Oh, yeah. It's so, here in San Francisco, like we try so hard. I try so hard to go to restaurants where I can just call them up and order and not go through Grubhub and just pick the food up. And some places still do their own delivery and you don't have to go through a platform, an algorithm. Anyway, so yeah, I wanted it to be a book that is kind of cozy adjacent where, there's tough stuff happening, but also there is this possibility of repair and recovery. So it's kind of a little of both. But yeah, I spent so much time making that restaurant as cozy as fucking possible.
Yeah. And you did a damn
everything I could think of. I was like, wait, what would I like? Really nice curtains. I also like flowers. I was just like, yes, there'll be flowers. There's going to be streamers and lights and everything I think is nice.
Reading the book, it was like, yeah, okay, Annalee's like, getting their interior designer out and talking like this is what the restaurant will be like. It was so much fun, honestly.
It was really fun to write. I feel honestly so much better after having done it.
Yeah. The thing is like the backstory is so bleak, but you do focusing on that like repair and I think like connection community, which is something we'll definitely delve into. Just as like a parent of two boys, that is such a huge thing, is like connection and repair. Just like you're gonna fuck up.
Yeah.
You're gonna fuck up.
You can't stop the conflict.
You can't stop it from happening. But I think there was a really nice balance in this novella in terms of, yes, there is difficult stuff that's going on, and obviously through the robots, you're allegorizing like the immigrant experience in the present day United States, and probably more specifically in a city like San Francisco, but with a more like cozy adjacent optimistic story of said robots opening a restaurant. So how did you use like food and that, commentary on restaurants as a way to balance the bleakness of the circumstances, the robophobia and different kinds of elements like that?
Yeah, there's obviously a long history of people coming to a new country and starting a small business. It's in my family's history. It's in lots of people's present day. And so I wanted to reflect that because these are people who've just become citizens. They lived in California, but they didn't have the right to be citizens. And so it made sense to me. And of course, part of it is that food is something very soothing. Food is part of community making. And it's also an art, especially the food that they choose to make, which is these special kind of hand-pulled noodles that come from basically kind of northwest China, the Shanxi region. And they're a pain in the ass to make. they really require.
Did you actually make it yourself in order to?
No, I am not. I'm not good with dough. I've done a lot of experimenting with bread and dough stuff, and the only thing I can make decently is chapati because it's like literally the easiest kind of flatbread. It only has to rest for like half an hour. You like make the dough really fast. It rests. You make it in its, yeah. Anyway, so biang noodles are like 5,000 times harder than chapati. So I watched a lot of videos. I ate a lot of biang noodles. I watched people making them when I could in person, but mostly I did exactly what Hans the robot does, which is watch a bunch of videos of really great people making them. And so I really wanted to emphasize a type of art that's designed to be shared and to make us warm and to literally nourish us, because some of the people coming into this restaurant are hungry. They don't have the money to eat, and they're living in tunnels under the city still. It's not a rich city anymore, and the population is much smaller than it is now. And so that was just very important to me to kind of to have something that is both art but also actual literal nourishment, something that builds community, something that is associated with just small businesses, something where it's not capitalism with a capital C. It's just people who are doing an art and trying to get paid. Kind of like I was talking about earlier when I said, I feel like my career is tricking people into paying me to write. I run a small business. I'm the sole proprietor. I'm making some stuff. I'm pounding it out every day. And I really am grateful that people pay me enough money that I can live on it. And it is a little bit like making noodles every day, because some days, just like Hans, I'll try to pull the dough and it just sucks. I just wind up cursing. And some days it's like the greatest flavor in the universe.
Annalee is the biang noodles of science fiction.
Of science fiction. You heard it here first. I love
that. Would be amazing.
Annalee biang
so spicy.
Well, let's talk about Hans and the other robots. They're fantastic. I love them. They all have such unique personalities and their own little quirks and their own things going on. Can you talk about how you've developed these robots and their personalities? And, as we mentioned at the top of this episode, you've written robot android POVs in the past, like in Autonomous, which I know Adrian and I both adore. What are your favorite methods for using what are your favorite methods that you use to humanize a robot character for a human reader?
Oh, that's such a good question. I always think of it the other way. How do I roboticize the human perspective? I think I was actually saying this to someone the other day. I think there's this idea that a robot is someone who has transcended their body. And I look at it from the other point of view. I think of robots as being truly embodied in a way that humans might have a hard time thinking about, because a robot could theoretically change their arms into octopus arms, or be an octopus, as Cayenne, the robot in the book, is. They can alter their bodies. They can sense things that humans wish they could, or that humans have to work really hard to experience. And so there's a way in which I think it's kind of easy to identify with robots, because they are what we dream that we would be if we could have complete control over our bodies. And anyone who's done yoga or weightlifting has had that moment where they kind of feel like a robot because you finally unlock the like, oh, I finally like benched 60 pounds. Okay, that's not a lot, but I did bench 60 pounds yesterday. I felt pretty awesome. And I was like, yes, upgrade. And I think that is, in a weird way, because robots aren't like us, we can identify with them aspirationally. But one of the things I always do with my robots is I try to show that they are all really different. They're not kind of clones of each other. They aren't just automatons. They all have different kinds of bodies. All of the robots in this book are based on real life robots that I've read about in engineering manuals, except for Stay Behind, who's kind of a Terminator character. And people talk about making humanoid robots like that, especially Elon Musk. But I've never actually seen one that was quite like Stay Behind, who's a real mech, like something out of anime. But the other robots, the soft tissued robot, the octopus robot, I met that robot. I met a turtle robot too, but I like the octopus better. I've certainly, seen many, many real life and video examples of robots that are just arms. I mean, those are your standard factory robots that are just arms attached to some kind of chassis. And of course, Sweetie, the character who's kind of a humanoid attached to 3 wheeled legs. I was reading a paper about how a 3-legged wheeled robot would navigate the world. And I was like, ooh, I should do that. So people are really thinking about the algorithms that would help a 3-legged wheeled robot, which is very specific, navigate. So I think that the best thing to do is just make those characters feel like people.
Yeah. Well, I think honestly, like the experiences that they go through too, not only are they individual in terms of their shape and sort of like the mechanics of them as a robot, like essentially what their functions are before this sort of like post-war environment and circumstances, but also like their thought processes is like, yes, Hans is like an Octobot. What better fucking profession for an Octobot than working in a restaurant, right? Like there are certain circumstances where like this is too perfect, and it was really cool to see how each of them revealed their personalities through their different desires and their different interactions with the other characters and their circumstances within the restaurant was.
Also, they're all in group chats together all the time, exactly. Because they have antennas built into their bodies, so they can just psychically join a group chat essentially. And I was like, that's really relatable because that's me and all my friends. We will be in a room physically, but we're still chatting with each other to like have the kind of secret back channel.
Sidebar. Well, I love when like the human character comes in the beginning and they're like, oh, we should probably talk out loud because we're kind of being rude.
Yeah. Or invite him into the group chat. And, don't exclude him.
And Robles, the human who they are friends with, Robles is like, wow, you guys talk fast. Okay, this is a lot of messages.
Well, we have to ask this question just because I've seen like whatever. We all know there's controversy around LLMs and quote unquote AI right now. And so I am just curious as to how you balance your love for sci-fi and science and robots with the potential that someone may misinterpret or underinterpret, I guess, the story as being a favorable look upon like ChatGPT. You know what I mean? Like if you actually read the story, it's very clear that that's not what's
here. I haven't. I luckily I haven't had too many people think that. I was more worried that people would think it was pro crypto because there's a lot of stuff about cryptocurrency in the book, and Cayenne, the Octobot, is obsessed with getting in on the ground floor of a cryptocurrency. And so I don't think LLMs are anything like what these robots are like in the book. I mean, LLMs are just, as many people have said, a stochastic parrot. They're just autocomplete, with a little bit more bells and whistles. And I think, honestly, a lot of this book is, in fact, a very sharp rejoinder to a lot of the marketing hype around products from companies like OpenAI or Anthropic. And the advertising campaigns for these companies is these AIs will become your overlords. They will take over. They will take your jobs. A lot of the robophobic rhetoric in my book is taken directly from those kinds of ad campaigns. And part of what I wanted to say was if a company like OpenAI really did somehow manage to develop a human equivalent kind of intelligence like what these robots have, they absolutely would enslave them. There's no question. There's no robot uprising. There's no AI overlord. There's only a plan for slavery. And all of these robots are suffering because there is all of this mythology and rhetoric out there about how they're evil and they're going to take over and take human jobs and they want to be our overlords and all this kind of nonsense. And they're just people who want to get over their PTSD from the war and make a bowl of noodles and make a couple bucks and like just have a place to sleep. They're not overlords. And I really think, again, I can't imagine that we would have human equivalent intelligence in robots in the 2060s. I don't see that happening, especially with all the funding cuts to scientific research. But I do think that if we did, that this is a much more likely scenario than something where the robots take over.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of the beauty of science fiction. As I was saying earlier, it's like culture and counterculture. It's really fantastic that we can have stories like this, especially through the lens of science fiction, to just be like, this is why I love near future sci-fi so much, is like, here is a potential outcome. Here is a glimpse at what we could achieve, or ideas that would allow for the betterment of us and humanity, but also in relation to the technologies that we create. It doesn't have to be like, I can't, like, it just boggles my mind when people, do, like we were talking about earlier, like stories are weapons. And so it's kind of like the narrative of like, this is what we're creating. And this is the messaging that we're putting out here with our advertisement narrative. They will take over your lives and take over your jobs and blah, blah, blah. And that creates these moral panics that really don't do anything to solve the nuances of the situation.
No.
We can have much more beneficial and communal conversations about this kind of stuff, as opposed to like, let's all freak the fuck out about this thing that we don't actually understand fully yet.
And which doesn't exist yet.
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
And if it did exist, it probably won't be anything like what we imagine. So, yeah.
Fingers crossed, just step by step a little bit better each time.
Yeah, I hope so.
And obviously, like, I want more of this world. It's a novella, so it's short and sweet, but I don't know. Personally, I'm making to read more stories about Stay Behind and Hands and the whole crew. So do you have any more stories planned for these fine bots at Authentic / Automatic Noodle?
Yes. I could easily imagine many more stories about these guys and their friends. And when I say guys, I just mean like little guys, no gender or size intended. But right now I'm actually in the home stretch on finishing my next novel, which is in no way related at all to robots. I'm afraid to say it does have elements that people might think of as being a little bit cozy. It's certainly relatively low stakes. There's no, the galaxy will not blow up. It's really just, will a graduate student manage to become a professor? But the graduate student is a single-celled organism who lives in the cloud of gas around our galaxy. So they have some stuff to do. And
I'm already so fascinated. Like, I'm already.
It's another one that's been really fun to write. So hopefully people will like it.
Oh my gosh. Well, I can't wait for more to start coming out on that. I'm going to follow that closely. All right. Well, to close out and wrap up episode 1 of our recording today, can you give listeners and viewers of the show 2 things? First of all, is a good bit of soundbite writing advice. And the second one is, and I think you are going to be like fantastic for this one, a weird or random fact that you find to be utterly fascinating.
Okay. So good writing advice. My writing advice is that one of the most important parts of writing is not writing. And I'm actually going to be teaching Clarion next week in San Diego. And that is what I am doing for my week at Clarion is I am telling the students not to write and instead to come up with ideas and observe and go places they'd never gone before, try to look at the world in a different way. I think when you're writing something, of course, it's important to have a routine. And in order to get a whole book done, you do have to sit down eventually and slave away. But it's also important to take breaks and to refill your brain with other people's stories and with literally going on a walk or visiting someplace new. So that's my advice. If you're feeling frustrated, go outside, mow the lawn, talk to a bunny, whatever you can do.
Hopefully the lawnmowers and bunnies are far away from each other. But...
Yeah.
You've seen it.
I was just sort of thinking of like things in the garden, bunnies.
This is an or situation.
You could just, this is not a, do not, it's not, an Aardman production where they've got the like giant machine that sucks up bunnies. Anyway, don't do that. Those bunnies were all fine, by the way.
Yeah.
And then, a weird fact. Let's see. Well, I'm in the early stages of researching a new nonfiction book. It's an ancient history of parties. And, so I went to the Bronze Age site, on Crete of, an ancient city, called Knossos. And it was a party town about 4,500 years ago. So people really were partying there. And so the fun, weird fact is that one of the most iconic items that was discovered at Knossos is this, he'll show you a reproduction of it. It's this figurine of a woman. Oh, you guys probably can't really see very well. Anyway, she's called the Snake Goddess, and she has the typical clothes of a woman from Knossos who is of a high status, which means her breasts are bare. She has this very cinched waist and a big flowing skirt. So she looks really badass. But the thing that makes her so cool is she's holding snakes in her hands, 2 snakes. And this is the fun fact, she has a cat balanced on her head. Why? Not a big cat, not a scary cat. Like she's holding the snakes, so you think she's like pretty tough, right. But she has like a house cat on her head.
I love that.
And you can sort of see like on top of her head here.
It's like a little kitty. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a kitty. And while I was at Knossos, actually, there was an incredibly cute cat that was just like snoozing in the ruins and hanging out, maybe somehow related to this. But it's just the civilization at Knossos was incredibly weird and interesting, very unlike anything else in the world at that time. And they just had this badass goddess or something. We don't know what she was. We have no records of what she was called, but she wore a hat with a cat. So she had to be pretty cool.
I love how you just dropped this Minoan cat hat reference. This is fantastic. I'm also super jealous that you got to go to Knossos.
Oh, so cool. And I went around with this archaeologist, Amelia Odo, who studies a lot of the mosaics there. Mm-hmm. And so she gave us the total down low on like everything. It was so cool. Yeah. Anyway, so that book won't be out for a few years, but
I'm just so excited to read this.
Yeah, I'm excited to finish researching it. I'm just at the very beginning. So
I highly recommend people just go learn more about the Minoan culture beyond just like the Minotaur. It's so fascinating.
And also Minotaur totally made up by Greek people later. Like that was not a thing. Like in Minoan culture.
There were bulls in Minoan culture, yes.
Yes, and there are these famous huge bull's horns that are like a sculpture of bull's horns at Knossos. But I mean, they obviously were into bulls, but they were also into snakes and cats. Yeah. Nobody's calling them
they're not picky.
I know. And it's like, why don't we have like a whole myth about this lady with the cat on her head? Why is it all about these bull guys? I don't know. So seems like.
Who is writing the stories?
Censorship.
Annalee?
Yeah.
Come on. Not the right people. I need more stories about the cat lady.
The snake goddess. It's really funny that it's all up there. Everybody's just like, she's the snake goddess. And I'm like, but the cat. Anyway, so she also had 2 snakes. So, don't mess with her or the cat.
If you're listening in audio, go check the video and just look at this cat lady.
Yeah.
She's fantastic.
Yeah.
And Annalee, thank you so much for chatting with MJ and I today. It's been absolutely
Yeah, you're
fantastic.
very welcome. Thanks for having me.
As well, if you contribute $5 or more to our Patreon, you can access a reading by Annalee from their new novella, Automatic Noodle. So go check that out. Go check out the book. It's out today when this episode releases. Highly recommend it. Also, just Annalee's nonfiction and fiction, all fantastic stuff. You got like archaeology in 4 Lost Cities, but then you have psychological warfare and stories as weapons and all kinds of cool stuff all over the place. Annalee, could you let everyone know where they can find you online?
Well, you can certainly find me in any bookstore. If you're looking to buy one of my books, I recommend either go to your local indie or go to bookshop.org, which will order from a local indie bookstore. And you can also find my stuff. I'm on Blue Sky. I'm Annalee N on Blue Sky. And of course, I have a website, AnnaleeNewitz.com.
Antiquated. No.
I know. I'm still on the web.
No, everyone should have websites. It's a fun time.
Yeah.
But I don't know who actually
by the way, Automatic Noodle also has a very silly website at automaticnoodle.website, and it's designed allegedly by the robots themselves, and it's a 1990s retro styled website because the robots are obsessed with 90s aesthetics. So yeah, check it out.
In brackets, Annalee's obsessed with 90s aesthetics. Love it. Fantastic. You can also follow SFF Addicts across the board at SFF Addicts Pod. You can follow me at Adrian M. Gibson. You can go check out Mushroom Blues wherever fine books are sold. MJ, what about you?
Yeah, you can find me across all the main socials at MJ Kuhn Books. I'm usually on Instagram these days or mjkuhn.com. And yeah, you can buy my books wherever fine books are sold as well. So let's do it.
And support MJ's kitties. Go get Greta's books, support her kids. And if you're in Seattle for WorldCon next week, come catch us. We've got a podcasting workshop. We've got a live podcast panel with George R. Martin, Brandon Sanderson, and Robin Hobb, and Rebecca Roanhorse, and Ryan Cahill talking about epic fantasy. And then MJ, Greta, and I all have a bunch of panels that we're taking part in. So come say hi.
Hi.
Yeah, get some bookmarks and stuff and just say hello. All right, well, that's it for this episode. Stay tuned next week for part 2 with Annalee for their writing masterclasses on interfaces in science fiction, which I'm very, very excited about. Until then, keep reading, keep imagining, and we'll see you next time on SFF Addicts.